Just 5 days after the end of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln is the final of the 600,000 deaths in America's bloodiest conflict. The country is divided, and the world looks at American democracy as a failed experiment.
Alright, I think y'all can hear me.
But what most don't realize is that a new era has dawned. The nation is entering an age of advancement. And from the void left by the death of perhaps the greatest statesman we will ever know, a new breed of leader will emerge.
The Rockefellers, the Fords, the Carnegies were the first generation of what we know is now the entrepreneurial rock stars, or what today are the Buffetts and the Jobs and the Gates. They were the ones that set the standard for the American dream. They owned a new frontier, literally and figuratively, of who we are as a culture.
Men of insight, innovation,
Okay, how do I do
and
this?
ingenuity, the likes of which the world has never seen. And over the next 5 decades, this small group will change history, propelling the United States of America to greatness.
These were great men with a vision that nobody else had.
Okay,
And that's why
I think that's
in the
good.
last century, that 50-year
Okay.
period, we built
I'm ready.
the world.
Alright, so we're watching the Men Who Built America. I don't know shit about it. We'll figure it out together.
For the first time in the country's short existence, the man most capable of leading America is not a politician. He's a self-made man who, through sheer force of will, turned a poor upbringing on the docks of New York Harbor into an empire.
Motherfucker Rockefeller
At
was his
16,
name.
Cornelius Vanderbilt buys
Oh,
a
Vanderbilt.
small ferry boat with a $100 loan. He quickly earns a reputation as a cutthroat businessman, willing to use any means necessary to get ahead.
Back then, it was just pure competition. My brain against your brain, my effort against your effort. You just competed.
Who's got the best effort of them all?
That's the way they looked at business. It was the wild, wild west. And by hook or crook, it was just win or lose, and the best win.
He was a tough guy, getting into scraps with other men, beating the hell out of them and knocking them unconscious. That competitive streak and that toughness very much defined his character.
His single ferry soon becomes a fleet of ships, transporting goods and passengers to every corner of the growing country. Vanderbilt will become so synonymous with shipping that his nickname becomes the Commodore.
I think Vanderbilt recognized that what was going to be important is transporting goods from one place to another. And he had this idea that required infrastructure, and not infrastructure
Oy vey.
that the government was going to provide, but that he was going to provide.
Whatever, that's good enough.
Over the next 40 years, Vanderbilt builds the largest shipping empire in the world. Then, at the peak of his power, just before the Civil War, he does the unthinkable. Work is underway on the first transcontinental railroad, and the Commodore realizes that its completion will transform America, slashing cross-country travel time by months.
Railroads were absolutely liberating because the railroads allowed cheap and efficient transportation from one corner of America to another.
Vanderbilt sees his future. He sells all of his ships and invests everything he has in railroads.
You talk about seeing around corners as an element of success. That's what differentiates the good leader. Not many people have it. Not many people can predict that corner. That is a characteristic of great leaders.
His decision to invest heavily in rail pays off. By the end of the war, Vanderbilt is the richest man in America, with a net worth of over $68 million, the equivalent of $75 billion today. But all that money
Probably about
can't
90
buy his
billion
escape
today.
from the war's devastation.
I don't know how old this is. Come on, sleeves.
In the wake of the Civil War, the country mourns publicly, while Vanderbilt does so privately.
The first card is the past, the second, the present, and the third is the future.
Book.
There has been an unexpected loss. Someone close to you.
My son, George. He died in the war. What about the future?
The chariot. There will be a war.
War's over.
No.
Nope.
Your war is about to begin.
War just getting started. The hell is my thing? There we go.
Watch it, man.
Tormented by the loss of his favorite son, Vanderbilt's empire is more vulnerable than ever before.
For Vanderbilt, this is a great tragedy. He had one son who had that same sense of physical strength and ability, and he had died when he was still quite young. It was deeply troubling for the Commodore.
For years, Vanderbilt groomed George to take over the family business. Now, the Commodore is forced to rely on his less accomplished son, William.
I'm making you operations director of the Hudson River.
Vanderbilt places William in the midst of negotiations with the owners of a rival railroad.
So name your price.
If you give us your freight year-round, we will give you the privilege of allowing your passengers access into Manhattan for $200,000.
That privilege is not worth $200,000.
Then let us settle on $100,000. I believe that to be a fair and generous offer.
I'm not really interested in your generosity. I'm only interested in getting the best deal for my shareholders. And that does not include handing over $100,000 or even $1.
My father wants only what he believes is right.
The trouble is, your father doesn't know what is right. The old man should be put out to pasture.
The message is clear. The competition no longer sees Vanderbilt as a man to fear.
People are always rooting for very successful people to fail. The day people are not taking shots at you, it means you're not on top anymore.
But where they see weakness, the Commodore sees an opportunity to assert his dominance and teach William what it means to be a Vanderbilt.
If they want a war, I'll give them a war.
Vanderbilt owns the only rail bridge into New York City. It's the gateway to the country's largest port, supplying the entire continent. Vanderbilt knows this is the hammer he needs to beat his rivals into submission.
Sit down. I want you to close the Albany Bridge.
Without the bridge, every other railroad is shut out of New York City.
Vanderbilt, in essence, single-handedly erected a blockade around the nation's largest city, cutting it off from contact with the rest of the country. He was now asserting his dominance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train will not be going any farther.
We're gonna watch them bleed.
The Civil War has left America in ruins. For the first time in its history, the nation must rebuild. Over 50,000 miles of railroad track have transformed the country. Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt grew up poor, but has created a railroad empire, making him the richest man in the country. At 72, he's 30 years past the average life expectancy, and his competitors see him as weak. It's a mistake they'll come to regret. Locked in a battle for control of the rail lines east of the Mississippi, the Commodore is holding nothing back.
I want you to close the Albany Bridge. We're gonna watch them bleed.
Vanderbilt controls the only bridge into New York City, America's busiest port. Seizing an opportunity, he sets up a blockade.
This train will not be going any farther.
Shutting the bridge leaves millions of pounds of cargo unable to reach the rest of the country, and slowly bleeds his competitors dry. Before their stock is worthless, the presidents of the rival railroad try to sell all their shares. Word quickly reaches Wall Street, triggering a massive sell-off.
New York Central shares are dropping fast.
How low?
$20 a share.
Buy everything you can.
Maybe just for one.
Vanderbilt was buying all of that stock that suddenly flooded the market at rock bottom prices.
3 aces.
In just days, Vanderbilt takes control of the rival railroad, creating the largest single rail company in America.
The New York Central Railroad became the centerpiece of his empire, and it came to him as the sudden result of a skillfully executed campaign to get revenge.
Railroads soon crisscross America, tying together the country in a way that just 15 years earlier was unimaginable, and providing over 180,000 jobs. Laying tracks becomes America's engine for unprecedented growth.
Railroads allowed the industrial economy to boom in ways that it couldn't have before.
One advance after the other, which essentially was led by the railroads, largely because there was a need to close the gap between those east of the Mississippi and those on the West Coast.
Vanderbilt has made himself the undisputed king of railroads. And now he wants the world to know it. He envisions a monument that will symbolize his immense power.
Work will begin on building a new station that will bring together the three railroads, the Harlem, the Hudson, and the Central. It shall be in the heart of New York and be called the Grand Central Depot.
Thousands of workers labor over the next 2 years on the most ambitious urban construction project America has ever seen. Grand Central is the biggest building in all of New York City and the biggest train station in the country, covering some 22 acres.
This enormous building towered over every other building in New York at the time. And it was a physical symbol of the size and power of Vanderbilt's railroad empire. Its importance as a physical symbol, as a physical capital of his empire, cannot be underestimated. And it still stamps New York's geography to this day.
Vanderbilt may be on top of the world, but his blind ambition will soon make him vulnerable to a challenge coming from the most unlikely pair imaginable.
The Vanderbilt, buddy.
thrusts America into the biggest building expansion the country has ever seen, led by a new breed of leader.
The story of America isn't just the story of the patriots that helped build the democracy. The reason the United States is the leading economy in the world is because of the work of entrepreneurs who created entire industries that propelled the United States to be the leader of the free world.
One man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, through brute force and intimidation, has made himself the undisputed king of the railroads. He now owns 40% of America's train lines. But he wants them all.
To me, it's always what's next, and I think that's what drives most very successful people. It's never about the money. I mean, that's a way of keeping score. It's about achievement, and it's about winning a game, and it's about upping the ante.
Chicago is America's fastest growing city. The line connecting it to New York is the most traveled and valuable in all the world. And it's not Vanderbilt's. To make his empire complete, he must gain control of the Erie Line.
The Erie was one of the relatively early publicly traded corporations. Vanderbilt had the advantage of millions and millions of dollars. Deep pockets are always an advantage when you're trying to gain control of a corporation.
Vanderbilt instructs his agents to buy up as much stock as possible, demanding control of the company by the end of the week. It's a vintage Vanderbilt move, one he pioneered, known today as a hostile takeover.
Yeah, so the shirts that I'm posting tonight, I'm still working through a lot of the older fabrics I have.
Thwarted by an even more ingenious
Sorry
idea.
for the saturation issues. Just
Cooked up
sometimes
by two unknowns.
the shirts ain't
Jay
good,
Gould
or the dye
and
mixture.
Jim Fisk.
All right. The mistake that the Erie board made is that they
on my side that day.
telegraphed where they need to expand without securing the land first.
Gould and Fisk are stuck in middle management at the Erie, but they represent the new America that Vanderbilt is helping to create. One of self-made men with ruthless ambition. And after years of
Ideally,
watching the Commodore dominate,
my thoughts with this live stream is
they're
to
eager to build their
not this
own
live stream, but the
empire.
one on YouTube.
They recognize Vanderbilt's plan to buy the line and see the opportunity
Discussion going. I got stuff on
they've
my
been
mind
waiting
that
for.
I guess I can't convey in the form of text messages.
Really, I think what most businesses is about is doing a better job on out hustling your competitors.
I don't know, I want to go live and I want to. I have a Discord too where you can get in there and you can express your opinion. Yeah. Maybe we can talk on the show.
Gould and Fisk begin printing new shares of
By
stock.
the show, I mean the fishbowl stream.
Using a printing press they set up in the basement of the Erie offices. Each share they print dilutes Vanderbilt's stake in the company, and they print over 100,000.
There was some fine print in one of the clauses of the Erie's charter that allowed the board of directors to issue new stock.
That did take a few minutes.
To shareholders.
Still about 30 minutes till the.
And so
trying to stay
the
live
more
here on
shares that
Instagram.
Vanderbilt bought, the more he had to buy in order to approach that
So
magic
that happens,
majority.
and then once the drop goes live on the shop,
Their plan is known as watering down stock. Highly illegal today. At the
And I do
time,
not know
it
when
had
it
never
will
been
end.
imagined. Its simplicity is brilliant,
I might edit down the
and
streams.
Wall Street is never the same.
The only rule was there
Cut
were
out
no
the
rules. Whatever it took
edgy
to
conversations
put
and
your
just leave
competition
the
out of business,
side-eye work.
they were going to try to
Maybe
do
just-
it.
Unaware, Vanderbilt continues to buy.
Think of the look on his face. Oh, God, I wish I could be a
I'm
fly
sitting
on
down,
that wall.
doing tie-dye all day and watching. Might as well share the experience. I own echo chamber. Not you all, but I'd like to. That is to join the Discord.
The freshly
There's
printed
a link
shares
too on the YouTube
are
channel.
hand-delivered to Vanderbilt.
I'm doing the same thing over and over and over with this shirt.
Here are the Erie shares.
Now he's gone.
I assume we control the company now.
No joke, I have spent an hour trying to iron a single item before. The seams weren't lining up. Wrinkles that I could not get to come out. Oh.
To money.
To Vanderbilt's money.
There's a watch party on Discord as well,
Vanderbilt
where I'll be
$7
playing
million
documentaries,
watered-down stock from Gould and Fisk,
news, not like C-SPAN and shit like that, but like
worth over $1 billion.
talking heads, podcasters, shit like that. If I know you personally or have interacted with you on the internet and you want to come on and say something with your voice, urge that. But I need to know who you are so I know that you're not just gonna come on, yell the N-word or whatever. Not be good.
Vanderbilt has been underestimated before. But if you come at the king, you
But I am
shouldn't
looking to get
expect to win.
Various points of perspective, I guess.
The greatest growth
I don't think I've got all the
in
answers
America's short
to-
life is underway. Rail lines now connect
I'm sure you don't
huge
either, but
expanses
maybe
of the
together
country.
we can at least
Controlling them means having power that just 5 years earlier was unimaginable. Many are staking their claim.
And there's another live stream going on parallel to this one on
I think
YouTube.
there are people in every
It's got
generation that have a vision
The fabric I'm working on right now
transcends their moment and their time.
documentary going on.
Commodore Cornelius
And there's a
Vanderbilt owns more
ad there
miles
too.
of rail than anyone in the world. But like all men of power, he faces constant challenges.
Competition gets very aggressive. People have no idea how aggressive it is. And sometimes you don't even hear because what goes on behind your back is not a pretty picture.
At the height of his power, Vanderbilt is outsmarted by a pair of unknowns.
To Vanderbilt's money.
Jay Gould and Jim Fisk have fleeced the Commodore out of millions. And they want the world to know it.
Thank you. Don't mind if I do.
It is no secret what Vanderbilt has been trying to do. He owns more railroads than anybody else.
About 840
Gould
here.
and me,
My goodness.
we have struck a blow for the little guy. Now, sure, he may be rich and sure he may be powerful, but somebody
I have zero
had to stand up
experience
to the old
entertaining.
bastard.
But that's a skill that I'm hoping I
It
can
was
develop.
a humiliating defeat for the Commodore, a man who was so fiercely competitive.
I'd like to do my tie-dye
who
streams
wanted
earlier
to win
in
at
the day,
absolutely everything,
like working
to
hours,
whom money was so important.
nighttime,
And
get
here he
more
was, defeated and insulted publicly by Gould and Fisk.
investigative side of things.
Gould and Fisk may be on top of the world, but they've awakened a sleeping lion.
Right back.
Vanderbilt vows to never be beaten again.
They don't think in terms of money. They think in terms of winning. Now, naturally, if you win big in business, money follows. But that shouldn't be your objective. Your objective should be to win. To win, win, win all the time. Not sometimes, every time.
So something I find funny about myself
begins looking for a new
is that I
edge.
love to iron. I love ironing all
He
these
realizes
products
that the
that I put out,
railroads have been overbuilt,
but I can never make
and
time
the
to
future
iron
of
my
the
own
industry
clothes.
isn't in building new lines, but in transporting new cargo.
I iron everything that I find out 2 or 3 times
Innovation
before
is
it gets sent
not
out.
a big
I just absolutely cannot
breakthrough
be bothered
invention
to do
every
it for
time.
myself.
Innovation is a constant thing. But if you don't
Guy
have an
who washes
innovative
dishes
company
all day for his job, he
coming
does
to
not want
work
to come home and wash
every
dishes
day
at his
to
house.
find a better way, you don't have a company. You're getting ready to die on the vine.
The difference being I love ironing and most people
If
don't love dishes.
Vanderbilt can corner the market on a new source of freight, one that can keep his trains constantly full, he'll be able to control the railroad industry. And the Commodore knows just where to look.
Oh yeah, I saw somebody in chat said something about this Bomberman shirt, which is pretty dope. I love it so much. I got it from Alex Coster. He did it based off of my tattoo. It's awesome. He knows a lot about music. He knows a lot about the
Oil is revolutionizing life in America. Crude from the ground is being refined into kerosene. A safe and inexpensive source of light.
Some of you know already, but for those that don't, I wanted to just say that I have plans to go to Colorado.
Before kerosene, the average American didn't have access to a consistent light source. When the sun came
So
down,
I already sent most of my
darkness
supplies
ruled.
out there, which is why I'm working through the older shirts that I have.
Kerosene is a phenomenon that will forever change
So
the
I
world.
worked through those because I sent
And
most of my stuff out to Colorado
it's his
already.
next opportunity to cash in.
So I'm
The
kind of winging
idea
it.
is to see what's missing.
It's also
That's
part
what
of
a
why I was
creative
compelled to
entrepreneur
set up
does. He
this
serves
live
people
stream.
with things that they need. Some people can't find a new thing to do. But sometimes you see something that
Did I finish that
everybody
thought, or
has
did
to
it just? Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Oh,
it
man, I
went
gotta get
somewhere
this.
else.
And then you go to work on
It's
it
hard for me
because
to
they
hang on
need it.
to them.
Vanderbilt sees the demand for kerosene skyrocketing all across the country. He knows that to meet the demand, the makers of kerosene will need a new way to ship their oil. If Vanderbilt can corner the market on those oil shipments, he'll propel himself back to the top of the railroad industry. All he needs to do now is find a supplier.
We're going to extend along the South Shore to Cleveland.
Long sleeves are so frustrating to get the sleeves straight.
Cleveland is a small city of
Some
just
people
under
just fold
50,000.
literally just fold it in
But
half.
it's sitting on top of
I'm
an
kind of
ocean of
fixated
oil.
with putting the sleeves inside of one
Eastern
another.
Ohio is the Middle East of its day,
I don't think it makes too big of a difference.
and the area around Cleveland is one of the largest
But it's
oil
real zen for
fields
me
in the world.
to do it there.
Vanderbilt learns about a refinery built near the railroads in Cleveland, the perfect mark for his master plan. He reaches out to the owner, a struggling young oil man Vanderbilt is hoping to pluck from obscurity. That oil man is John D. Rockefeller.
Why are we paying so much on plumbers? We run a refinery. So we start making our own pipes. At this rate, we'll be lucky if we break even this year.
If you want to call it a day, John, just say.
Telling you, these sleeves are a workout.
I should go.
Real tie-dyers know.
Is everything all right?
It's fine.
At the age of 27, Rockefeller is in the early stages of building his refining business, but his company is teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. Vanderbilt sees him as someone he can manipulate to his advantage. An exclusive deal to ship Rockefeller's oil will guarantee that the Commodore's
So it's been
trains
about
stay filled with cargo.
15 minutes
Vanderbilt
since I started.
invites Rockefeller to meet with him in New
I'll
York.
go ahead and say it again. I've got a parallel live stream going on. Search
For the young
saltnsweeties,
oil
you should
man,
find my channel.
the meeting is the opportunity of a lifetime.
Like it,
A way
just like it's
out
spelled
of
here
his
on
troubles.
Instagram, but without the underscore.
And a way to save his company from complete collapse.
And over there we've got
Rockefeller, he respected
better visual on
Vanderbilt.
what
He
I'm
could see
doing
what he had achieved.
right here.
Vanderbilt was setting the pattern and the
Also links
archetype
to the
of what
Discord.
Rockefeller himself wanted to be. He wanted to be the Vanderbilt of
Got a watch party
petroleum.
going on. We're watching
That's the way he saw himself.
Built America. That's almost
As
over. We can.
Rockefeller prepares
I'm
for his
open
trip to
for
New York,
whatever.
Vanderbilt's plan is set in motion.
I like current events. I like news. I don't want to say I like politics because I really don't. I think politics is really frustrating. However, a lot of the things that I do want to talk about are politically charged. See it go with the flow. Probably shut up. If y'all want to talk about Sesame Street, we'll talk about Sesame. Adventure Time, whatever. I don't care. I don't really care about any of that stuff. But my point is, if you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. We'll send me links in Discord, and I can put them in the watch party. We'll check them out together, do live commentary. Still got 2 more of these to iron before I can. Actually, I've got a lot more ironing to do. That's pretty much all we're gonna do tonight's iron. By the time I'm tired of that,
is rising. The country is experiencing a period of growth like none it's ever seen. Railroads have united the states.
Again, I'm gonna try and do this like every day if I can.
Never before thought possible.
Start out by
The man at the
streaming
forefront
highlights
of
in
this
the morning.
explosive change is
So like the
Cornelius
evening,
Vanderbilt.
stop
But
the
at
stream,
76, he
go eat,
realizes that the
go eat,
railroads
and
have
then
been overbuilt.
come back with the second portion. We'll do
To stay ahead of the
investigation
competition,
discussion.
the Commodore turns to a new exploding industry and a struggling young oil man, John D.
That way I
Rockefeller.
can maybe keep them sort of separated. That way,
Vanderbilt invites him to
people who
New
get
York
triggered
City for a meeting.
by me wanting to know things. Tiedye streams. There's a drop happening in the shop in about 10 minutes at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is for you, but it's about 10 minutes till 9 here. Also, I've got a lot of 3X's and 4X's in the shop right now. I'd like to move some of those so I can make some fresh ones.
The Lord is my shepherd.
At any point, if somebody wants to do
I shall not want.
set up a deal for some 3X and 4X,
He maketh me to lie down
send
in
me a
green
message on
pastures.
social media, and I will get back to you once I'm done streaming.
He restoreth my soul.
Set you up like a buy one get one or something like that.
John Rockefeller narrowly missed the train, one that would have carried him to his certain death. The close call has a profound impact on the young oil man.
He leadeth me into paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Amen.
A man of deep faith, he becomes convinced that God has spared him for a reason.
Without thinking that he himself, in particular, was chosen by God to become this great business success, Rockefeller believed that everything was divinely ordained. So nothing happened in the world without God's will, without God's blessing.
Rockefeller once again heads to meet with Vanderbilt as a changed man. Where before he was intimidated and facing bankruptcy, now he's a man of destiny. Cornelius Vanderbilt may be the richest and most powerful man in the country, accustomed to getting what he wants. But he has no idea what he's about to encounter.
Every business is about understanding people, which people you have to get through, which people you have to embrace, which people you have to jump over, which people you have to push out of the way. That's the game.
ladies and gentlemen. While I don't like to show off, I sometimes come down to Muscle Beach to flex and stay in shape because one needs to maintain a healthy body in order to benefit from a healthy mind and spirit. Sometimes it just takes me a little while to get warmed up. Let's try this one more time. Okay, now she must just have beginner's luck. Let me try to get some air. I guess that we're all born with different talents, endowed with various degrees of natural skill, strength, and intelligence, but we can also all improve our various weaknesses with lots of practice. While none of the ladies at Muscle Beach seem impressed or intimidated with my upper body strength, you better believe they still know who the world's most dangerous anthropologist is. Now let's go have a stroll by the water. The term occult means secret or hidden in the context of supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena. From a modern Christian perspective, these practices are considered heresy and frowned upon, and a few short centuries ago were punishable by death, usually after a considerable amount of torture. Before Christianity, however, much of the spirituality of the ancient world involved mysticism and magic and was performed out in the open. This was especially true in places that were influenced by a demographic of people who are mostly remembered by the color red, the most famous being the Phoenicians, which means red in Greek, but also the Minoans, Etruscans, Egyptians, Mycenaeans, and several Native American tribes, among others on both hemispheres of the Americas. These ancient civilizations were known for being seafaring and controlled a vast global trade network which generated great wealth, especially during the Bronze Age, but came to a relatively abrupt end after a series of wars which ended in defeat at the hands of the Roman Empire.
We're outnumbered, and the Romans have chosen a battlefield that plays to the strengths of its infantry. It's a wise choice, but it's not as wise as they think.
Ready yourself!
see our cavalry advance, they will respond. Whatever your losses, you must drive them back and sow complete confusion.
Some scholars contend that the original and early forms of Christianity was considerably different from the type that the Roman Catholic Church disseminated several centuries after the life of Christ. Some researchers claim that Jesus himself may have been part of a sect known as the Essenes, which practiced a form of Gnosticism, which implies a direct connection with divinity, as opposed to requiring a pope, priests, and a hierarchical power structure that was imposed later by the church. These Gnostic practices were deemed heretical, vilified, and forced to go underground, especially in places like Europe, where the Inquisition hunted and executed those that continued to practice in secret. Groups like the Cathars, Templars, and what in a general sense are referred to as pagans were labeled as witches and either exiled or killed. In a prior video I made called A Brief History of Witches, which I'll leave a link to in the description, I had said that many of the witches were Rh negative and that the rhesus negatives were targeted. Of course, many of you astutely commented that Rh negative blood factor was discovered in 1940, so how would they have known who to target centuries earlier? While you guys are absolutely correct, my intention was to make you think without spelling it out. They were, according to some, targeting a specific race that was entering Europe from the Middle East. These people were bringing their old religion into Europe, and many Roman soldiers, for example, subscribed to these Aryan rituals, which went by different names. In the case of the soldiers, Mithraism was most common, and the emperor felt threatened by it. These ancient religions, which predate Christianity by many millennia, and some claim go all the way back to the Ice Age, during the mythical times of Atlantis, continue to be practiced in secret under the guise of alchemy, with the ancient teachings disguised as symbols and passed on orally or in the form of some esoteric books. Some of these books were discovered a few years ago in the Czech Republic, many containing instructions of sex rituals and what would be considered by most to be dark magic. It turns out that this esoteric library belonged to the inner occult order of the SS, the Black Sun, and more specifically Himmler, who was very into the occult as a sort of technology, as the Germans believed the ancient Aryans possessed powers which have been lost to modern man.
In the distant past, the Atlanteans, the fourth root race of creation, had split into pure and bestial species. After many thousands of years, the pure race, the Aryan god-men of the fifth root race, had interbred with the beasts. The result was catastrophic decline and the near loss of the Aryan psychic powers.
The SS occult elite regarded themselves as a form of holy knights, like the Knights Templar and Teutonic orders, and this library of 13,000 books found near Prague had not been accessed since World War II. Norwegian newspapers reported claims that at least some of the material was seized from the Norwegian Order of Freemasons in Oslo during the Nazi occupation of the country, and this is possible, and I'm sure many books were taken from similar secret societies all over Europe occupied by the Germans. Himmler founded the H Sonderkommando in 1935. The H stood for Hex, which is the German word for witch. Their mission was to collect as much information as possible on sorcery, the occult, and the supernatural in general. The majority of the collection was known as the Witches' Library. It focused on witches and their persecution in medieval Germany. Himmler believed that the Roman Catholic Church attempted to eliminate the German Aryan race with witch hunts. This was also the case with what we call werewolves, which I've already covered in a prior video. From the perspective of the SS elite, they represented the descendants of the Protestant side of the infamous 30 Years' War, in which there was a split in the church, which resulted in a degree of religious freedom and the Protestant Reformation. Himmler also allegedly learned that one of his ancestors had been burned as a witch, which I can't confirm, but the idea that Aryans were being burned to death is common knowledge in occult orders. The books were to be kept in Weibelsburg Castle in Western Germany, which was given the name Black Camelot by some, and is where Himmler created his court of SS knights, mimicking King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Today, the castle is a museum, and the esoteric occult practices of the National Socialist Party is rarely discussed, except to ridicule. But there are some exceptions, however, particularly in places in South America where beliefs in ancient civilizations like Atlantis, magic, and other occult practices were shared with the Germans and continued after World War II. When one thinks about an occult connection between the Germanic or Prussian Empire and South America, the first nation that likely comes to mind is Argentina, as relations between Germany and Argentina stretch back to 1871, when the first ambassador of Germany was sent to Argentina. German immigration in Argentina is the largest in Hispanic America. Over 3 million Argentines are of German descent. They had great influence in the Argentine education system, and many German schools were placed in the country. Argentina stayed neutral during World War II, except for the very end, but after the war, under President Juan Perón, many German National Socialist officials immigrated to Argentina and other parts of South America. Argentina is strategically located near one of Nationalist Germany's most secretive colonies, called Base 211, located in Neuschwabenland, Antarctica. While I've covered Antarctica in numerous videos, including the advanced technology the Germans developed during World War II that was moved there, and many people speculate was the true source of the UFO phenomena of the 40s and 50s, today I'd like to turn our attention to another South American nation which had favorable ties to the German Empire, and that was Chile. The first ties between Germany and Chile can be traced back to the 16th century, when the first German settlers arrived in the newly found settlements, and in 1810, when Chile became independent from Spain, Hamburg was one of the first cities that engaged in intense trade with Chile. During the revolution of Germany in 1848, as Chile encouraged Germans to immigrate, more and more German settlers arrived in Chile. In modern day's relationship, Chileans view Germans positively, and Germans view Chileans in a similar manner. Miguel Serrano, who passed away in 2009, was a Chilean diplomat, writer, and occultist who supported the German National Socialist Party during the war and after it. He became a prominent figure in the esoteric movement, which mirrored many of the occult ideas being explored by the SS. Chile also remained neutral during most of World War II, but Serrano campaigned in support of Germany and favored a far-right political ideology. In 1942, he joined an occult order founded by a German migrant which combined pro-Aryan sentiment with ceremonial magic and Kundalini yoga. This order claimed that the group owed its allegiance to a secretive Brahmin elite who resided in the Himalayas, a topic which I covered in my prior video called the Order of the Green Dragon. Through techniques of harnessing and transmuting life force energy, which in the East is known as chi or ki and called prana in India, this energy is also known as orgone, a term coined by another German researcher, Wilhelm Reich, who based the word off of orgasm. The order espoused a belief in an astral body, which could be awakened through various rituals and meditative practices by amplifying and channeling vril, or sex energy, prior to a full climax, which was said to make available to the practitioner access to the astral realms. Another influential Germanic occultist that migrated to South America was Arnoldo Krumm-Heller, a German esotericist who became an important figure in the spread of occultism in Latin America. He moved to Chile and other parts of Latin America, where he founded several occult orders, which included rituals like a Gnostic Mass as performed by other occultists, such as Aleister Crowley, but in other respects differed from approaches taken by Crowley, so I wanted to be sure to point that out as well. As the Second World War officially ended, Serrano was convinced that the Fuhrer had not committed suicide in Berlin, as was claimed by the victorious Allies. Instead, Serrano believed that he had escaped and was living in Antarctica, either in a secluded, warm environment on the continent, or more than likely under the ice cap itself in a military colony established by the U-boat division. After visiting Antarctica as a journalist with the Chilean army in 1947 and 1948, Serrano was absolutely convinced about the nationalist German occupation of the South Polar continent and wrote a book espousing that, quote, Antarctica is inhabited by unknown beings. He then traveled to Germany and then Switzerland, where he met the psychoanalyst Carl Jung and published a book about his time there. It seems Serrano has always been fond of Dr. Jung and the human potential. Quote, in 1947, I took a trip to the Antarctic, which I subsequently described in a book called Invitation to the Ice Fields. One thing I did not mention in that book, however, is that I took with me a book entitled The Ego and the Unconscious by Carl Gustav Jung. In my book, I explain the circumstances which brought me to meet Carl Jung. He wrote the foreword for my book, The Visits of the Queen of Sheba. I think that this Swiss professor knew better than anyone else in our time who H really was. Jung stated that H was possessed by the collective unconscious of the Aryan race. This means that H was the spokesman of the whole Aryan world. This extraordinary theme is explored in my book, The Last Avatar. Lucifer is the morning star. I'm a Luciferian in the sense that Lucifer is the morning star, the most beautiful light, and the morning star is a god, goddess, Venus. Contrary to misconceptions, Lucifer has nothing to do with Satanism. The Third Reich banned the Thule Society and other occult orders because there was too much old nonsense in these esoteric clubs, as well as some connections with Freemasonic societies, Aleister Crowley Satanism, and so on. The SS was also influenced by the Templar order. They tried hard to produce the Overman by using blood alchemy, the absolute man. The SS tried to transmute man to Superman in Sonnenmensch, or Sun Man, a man who will again be a god. This is an old Aryan concept, which is not unlike traditional Greek thought and the initiation of the mysteries of Apollo and Dionysus. The Dorian Greeks had a nostalgia for Hyperborea, and so do we. The first polar or Hyperborean race had the power called odal or vril, which has now been lost. The task of the adept is to try to recover this power and become like Shiva or Wotan again, the Overman. There are many legends about the Tibetans and the Battle of the Bunker. As a matter of fact, the mission of the Tibetans was to preserve and protect the entrance of the Hollow Earth, like the Incas in America. The real link between Tibet and the Third Reich was a swastika, the same as that of the religion of Bon, of pre-Buddhist Tibet, which was Aryan of the Dropas, of the Hyperborean.
The Hyperborean Aryan gods lost the purity of the blood. They mixed with the daughters of man, an involution, a paradise lost. The avatar comes at the last moment when everything seems lost. When the memory of the blood is faint, almost obliterated. The avatar rekindles the spirit, shakes the world, and infuses courage in those still loyal. During the final offensive in the Ardennes, SS soldiers wounded in British and American hospitals steadfastly refused blood transfusions for fear of losing the memory of the blood. The whole SS initiation ceremony at Wewelsburg centered around the recuperation and the regeneration of this lost memory of the blood. In order to understand Miguel Serrano, particularly this deep, obscure tome, this esoteric masterpiece, one needs to have read Savitri Devi, at least Her Lightning and the Sun. This is not a book. It is a musical mystery and mysticism, darkness and light, esoteric symbolism, astral travel, master and pupil, the memory of the blood, and so much more. A book describing the ongoing titanic and eternal battle between gods and devils. A dark force, a satanic spirit, and the coming or returning Hyperborean Aryan age.
It's a nice sunny day, and I decided to try a different cheesecake factory, this time in Woodland Hills, California. However, I couldn't resist ordering the same dish, herb-crusted salmon with mashed potatoes, asparagus, and lemon sauce. And it was just as good as the one in Santa Monica. If it isn't broke, why fix it? In fact, it was so good, I think I'll try to make this one at home. I'm sure I can figure out how to cook the fish and make mashed potatoes. I just need to get the ingredients for the lemon sauce. Okay, now that I'm full, let's go feed some of our friends by the lake. Duck is the common name for numerous species of waterfowl, generally smaller and shorter necked than swans and geese, which are members of the same family but not considered ducks. The word duck comes from an Old English word meaning diver, which I presume is from their ability to submerge themselves, which is fun to watch. Ducks generally only have one partner at a time, although the partnership usually only lasts for 1 year. In Celtic culture, duck symbolism is linked to migration and transition. They're a figure of resourcefulness, honesty, and simplicity. Ducks can live both on water and land, and so it's considered a symbol of intuition, flexibility, and high perceptions. Each element has its meaning. The earth is grounded and stable, water is connected to emotions, so a duck's meaning represents balance. In Scotland, we find the duck symbolism in the coat of arms. And an Irish folktale speaks of a saint by the name of Coleman who passed away, and near his graveyard there was a well that carried his name, and there used to be a pond there as well, in which a flock of ducks lived. It was said that these birds were under his protection and nobody could harm them. If anyone tried to kill and eat them, they'd either be unsuccessful or even die. I've been told by some of my friends that live on a farm near Staffordshire that ducks can also give egg-laying chickens a run for their money and are a friendly barnyard animal that enjoy living in family groups. Staffordshire is a county in England steeped in legends and well known for being a top destination for family outings because of its beautiful countryside. There are many flowing rivers that run through the county, as well as a thriving brewing industry. The town is still home to a number of great breweries, so it makes sense that there's also many historical and well-loved pubs. Now, as we casually glide over the tranquil countryside, I'd like you to pay attention to the topography. Notice the size of the trees, their spacing from one another, and particularly the architecture in terms of the height of the structures. How many stories are the buildings and homes, as this will become relevant shortly. While I've never been to the UK myself, although I very much would like to visit one day, I imagine that on a clear night one can see many stars, as there doesn't seem to be many street lamps or city lights. Of course, I'm assuming it would be a clear night, and I know England is known for its gloomy weather compared to places like Los Angeles, but if an object were to hover low, below the clouds, for example, near the rooftop of one of these homes, it would be quite visible, especially if it was lit up or giving off its own luminescence. Which brings us to an interesting case that allegedly took place here in 1954 on a relatively clear night in Staffordshire, where a woman named Jessie Rosenberg claimed to have been a witness to an encounter with a UFO. And what makes this case particularly noteworthy is that there was an object hovering in the air, which was very common all over the world in the early 50s, including one famous sighting right over the White House in 1952. But what made this case fascinating was that Jessie claimed the saucer-shaped craft, which she described as appearing like a Mexican hat, was so close that she could visibly, with the naked eye, see the occupants inside looking back at her. I was not that surprised to hear her detailed description of the occupants, as this was the most common description given by contactees following World War II, where off-world visitors were said to resemble Nordic-looking people. So let's listen to Jessie's account in her own words, which was broadcast by the BBC in a 1977 special on unidentified flying objects.
Staffordshire's had a whole crop of flying saucers. Spots in the sky, lights in the sky, strange things. But the strangest of all was seen one day over this cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Rustenberg were living there, quietly, out in the country. And, well, you just tell me what you saw.
Well, it was one ordinary day. I was waiting for my husband to come home from work, and my two sons went to Seifert to school, and I was getting changed, and I heard this terrific noise. It was just like a giant cauldron of water being poured onto a fire, a shh sort of noise, you know. And my first reaction was, oh, the children. I thought maybe a plane was crashing or something like that. And I slipped my jumper on and went outside to find my two sons lying flat on the ground in the garden in front of the house, shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Well, naturally, I just said, "Come on, don't be stupid. Come in the house." But felt sort of a strange sensation. Wended my way up the side of the house to where we had a pump, where we used to get all our water from, and automatically looked up to see this, all I can describe, this huge Mexican hat. It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in colour, and it had a dome. A dome. It was tilted to sort of, I could see the occupants in it.
You saw people in it?
I saw people in it. There were two people in there. These people were beautiful people. That's the only way I can describe them. They had long golden hair, like a page boy bob, just like the old kings. You used to see photographs of the old kings. And the colour of the hair was golden. Now, I was really...
What were they dressed in?
They had a sort of a polo neck jumper affair, like a ski top suit, in pale blue. Now, these people weren't sat behind, one behind the other. They were sat together, but this, whatever it was tilted so that I could see them and they could see me.
Were you looking at them through windows, through portholes, or what?
No, not portholes. It was just sort of like a cockpit, I suppose, that had this perspex or glass or whatever it was. They could see me anyway, and I could see them. And they had beautiful faces. I shall never forget their faces as long as I live. Their foreheads seemed to be a bit larger than, you know, the bottom of their faces as normal people you would expect to see. But maybe this was just whatever they had round their heads, which was like a transparent fishbowl. And they just looked. And I was absolutely paralytic with fear. I couldn't move, although my mind was ticking over. And they looked so sympathetic that I was just mesmerized for what seemed to be, ages, but it could have only been seconds. And I turned to sort of look down at the boys, was unaware that they were with me because I was so absorbed. And the next thing, I looked up and it was gone.
How low had it been?
It had been the height, I couldn't tell you. But the house that you've seen, it was just on top of the roof. It was hovering on top of the roof.
How big was it compared with the size of the house?
It swallowed the whole circumference of the roof. I couldn't see, the roof was completely blotted out. The chimneys I couldn't see. All I could see was this massive object that I described as like a Mexican hat without the bubbles.
And then it flew away sideways or upwards?
No, I didn't see. I just looked up and it had gone. but I assume it went straight up, because for a short while after in the sky, I looked around and I said to my two boys, "Where can you see anything? Can you see anything?" And they said, "There it is, Mum," and they pointed up, and I watched it. It was just like a little cotton reel in the sky, and it circled us 3 times. It went round 3 times, and then it just shut off, and that was it. When I started to analyze myself afterwards, I feared that I might have had an hallucination, but then I knew I hadn't had, because my sons were so sure about what they'd seen and what I'd seen. And it went through my mind that it was a secret weapon from Russia, and then I thought, well, it can't be that, because if they had something like that, they wouldn't need to fear anybody or anything.
Were you scared by it? Did you run indoors?
Oh, I was petrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with fear. But now I wouldn't be. Because now, when I look back, you know, I think, what an amazing thing to have happened, and for me to have seen it.
And when your husband came home, where were you?
Well, when my husband came home from the office, I was locked in the house with my children, under a big kitchen table that we were using.
Under the table?
Under the table, yes. It's funny now when I look back, you know, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but this is the truth. This happened. And that's it. We were ridiculed. It was very embarrassing at the time, and people, they possibly thought, oh, she's a nutter. But, you know, who cares? This is something that happened to me, and I'm a practically minded person, and that's it.
I find it interesting that she would consider the possibility that the craft may have belonged to the Soviet Russians, but quickly discounted that possibility, as with such technology, surely they would have taken over the world by now. That said, the idea that the craft may have belonged to Germans, let alone nationalist Germans, did not even enter her mind. And why would it, as Germany had been thoroughly carpet-bombed into oblivion by the Allies, and were fortunate to not have been nuked as well, as the Allies killed 15 million German civilians and were experts at invading other faraway lands and killing everyone. But only up until 1945, as in 1946 and 1947, when they invaded Antarctica during what is known as Operation High Jump, the Allies suffered a decisive military defeat by what many people 75 years later suspect were a subterranean German colony which never surrendered like the rest of Germany, but instead escaped with their alleged anti-gravitic technology, which historians refer to as Foo Fighters, and retreated to Antarctica, where they established a breakaway civilization which was impervious to the inferior weapons of the official winners of World War II. There's no question that Germany lost World War II, and it's a very different place today, which is still occupied by 50,000 US troops and acts as a vassal state to the Americans, which dictate a new globalist political agenda based on ideology that calls for no borders, no gender, and no race. A demoralized society without any connection to its history, culture, or the actual events before, during, and immediately following the Second World War. That said, Jessie, who's in her 90s now, did not suspect that the UFO phenomena could be connected to the Aryan elite that escaped the Nuremberg trials and instead continue to exist covertly, exercising their technological superiority with impunity in the skies above not only the United States, but the UK. Even today, she does not seem to connect the blonde inhabitants of the craft to the blonde Germanic adversaries her nation faced a few short years before her sighting in 1954.
The illustration. And the face is a slim either side.
A lot slimmer.
Beautiful.
Would that be why the Gavin Gibbons, when he did the illustration, I think it was a UFO News or something, that was a lot thinner in the face?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Sorry about that, Jessie. I haven't realised.
So we're Dawn's interrupting with a cup of tea. Come on then, Dawn.
The saucer was no longer there, but a few minutes later we saw it circle the house 3 times before it shot upwards like a rocket against the blue of the darkening sky. Quite true.
Yeah, thank you.
I've been speaking on this topic for quite some time now, and have found that to most people it seems like science fiction. Of course, most people also never stop to consider that the genre of science fiction itself is often based on some degree of truth, and in many cases steeped in government propaganda, as Hollywood, like NASA, is to a large degree influenced and restricted by intelligence agencies which prefer to withhold certain technological advancement from the public in the name of national security. The controlled media has been effective in dictating the narrative, as the modern UFO phenomena started during World War II on a national scale with the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, which I covered in a recent video, and yet people in the early 50s rarely suspected an Earth-based breakaway civilization, as they were more concerned with the possibility of people from other worlds. At least, that's what the media seemed most interested in.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
As these sightings of disc-shaped craft increased in the years following the Roswell incident of 1947, so did reports of interactions with the occupants of these craft, which oftentimes seem to be
tall, blonde, human-like aliens.
There's the Billy Myers case, where the alleged ET race seemed to be very attractive, and the primary contact being a blonde Nordic-looking woman. Another famous case was George Adamski, whose photos and video of the UFOs shared a striking resemblance to images leaked out of the former Soviet Union of saucer-like craft that were obtained by the Red Army as it invaded Berlin. While the latter models were called Haunebu, the early prototypes were called Vril.
The crafts were named Vril, and Vril in Germanic language means the life force. Basically, craft utilizing the never exhaustible always automatically replenishable life force. And then in a book on ancient
early prototypes were called vril.
The crafts were named vril, and vril in Germanic language means the life force. Basically, craft utilizing the never exhaustible, always automatically replenishable life force. And then in a book on ancient occult, German occult traditions, they had a chart of the runic characters, and this is the runic character for the life force. So it all drives together. The name of the craft, vril, the meaning of the word vril, and the pictorial symbol on the bottom all mean the same thing, the life force. So we were able to decipher this little puzzle here. 17 of the vrils were produced. Quite probably they were tested quietly, low-key testing, and then they were flown to the German South Polar colony. We will talk about it in detail pretty soon. And these are low-level photographs, the first real photographs of such craft in low-level flights over the testing grounds in Germany. It's probably the autumn of 1944. The leaves are gone from the trees. In this photograph, we can see the head of the pilot through the transparent perspex cupola of the craft. A very steep maneuver. Possibly the craft is moving in this direction upward because of all the edges. These and these edges are blurred. This happens usually with the edges, with the attacking and the trailing edge of the craft. What are those lines underneath? Parts of the drive. In this enlarged photograph, we see an even better picture of the pilot inside. These two dark spots here could be the sunglasses that the pilot was wearing. The craft could go 2,900 kilometers in the atmosphere, almost 2 times the speed of sound. It definitely had exoatmospheric and orbital capabilities. And I have a suspicion that these were free energy craft that did not need any fuel to fly. Once they were started and put in motion, I mean their gravity drives were activated, they did not need any more fuel to run. And we can see low-level flights, probably the autumn, early autumn of 44, the leaves are still on the trees. This visible asymmetricity here, if we divide the craft, it looks like the cabin has been blown backward by a strong wind, or it's kind of a cake melting in our refrigerator, just taken out of the fridge. Bigger craft, the Honeywood 2 type craft, which were 25 meter diameter, about 75 meter diameter tank killers, were also produced. They had one big drive, a ball in the middle, which was a tachyon drive, an electromagnetogravitic drive, which they were calling the tachyon drives. The Thule tachyonators, the Thule tachyon drives were produced on assembly lines. They had an assembly line production of tachyon drives in their AEG and Siemens plants in 44 and 45. So in these underground caverns, they had more than enough space and fantasy and guts to build all these incredible flying machines. Armaments were added. These are machine guns in 3 turrets. On this photograph, we see some of the armaments here clearly visible. Something is sticking menacingly from the underside of the craft. A shot from the underside shows the Luftwaffe cross, either the 4 legs or 4 small machine gun turrets, and something that looks very suspicious, something here that we would see very soon resembles like a tank turret with a gun sticking out. These were really the tank killers of the Honeywood 2 type. They were designed to fight whole tank armies. The skeptics would say, well, it's impossible to, what a stupid idea. It's impossible to put a tank turret on a saucer because it would never lift off. A tank turret is about 10-15 tons. It's alone is 2/3 or maybe half the weight of the tank. However, the Germans claimed that these craft were 100 tons in weight, armed with brute steel plates. They did not have developed at the time the force field shields around the craft that they developed later on. That's why they're relying on brute steel armor.
While more and more people are giving serious consideration to the idea that nationalist Germans managed to develop or obtain what effectively can be considered free energy craft, the German scientists themselves seem to imply that they had help from similar looking people from other worlds. That is to say, before the Germans allegedly broke away to Antarctica and South America, assuming that indeed took place, these paperclip scientists seem to imply that prior human civilizations either already broke away to colonize space, or maybe we ourselves are the offspring of a prior colonization, meaning we ourselves did not originate on Earth. Now, as an anthropologist, this theory, as outlandish and outrageous as it sounds to some of you, conveniently answers many puzzles for people like me that spent many years learning about scientific frauds, such as the Piltdown Man or Nebraska Man, 2 debunked missing links, the first being a fake and the latter being a misidentified pig's tooth. Humanity having a celestial, non-native origin would make it no longer necessary for desperate anthropologists to do all this mental gymnastics to force obsolete paradigms to work, like out of Africa theory, which involves claims that an ape-like foot with a big toe that sticks out to the angle like a thumb, obviously used for grabbing branches, was actually a bipedal hominin ancestor displayed in many museums. Not only do I have a problem with the simian anatomy that some anthropologists try to pass off as bipedal, meaning upright walking, nothing that walked upright like we do had all that fur. Unlike apes and monkeys, we sweat a lot, and there's an explanation for this, which has to do with how bipedal hominins hunted. People cannot outrun most animals, like a gazelle for example, which can reach speeds of up to 60 miles per hour in short bursts, but it cannot sustain that for hours. People, however, can run for long periods of time, and this is demonstrated in marathon runners, where sweating becomes a necessity to be able to cool off after running down animals right before plunging a weapon into its exhausted body. So these upright, bipedal, hairy specimen with hands as feet, allegedly almost human, are paleo art and created to push a political agenda, not a scientific one. All aspects of the out of Africa theory lacks empirical evidence, from how races came to be to the hominin origins coming from tree dwellers. No ancient origin myth or religion attributes our start to monkeys. Many of them in fact claim that apes evolved from us, where the common ancestor took to the trees after some sort of global cataclysm, and instead of the other way around. If this sounds counterintuitive to you, It's now being proposed by members of the scientific community, so it's worth taking a look for yourself, since the media has no incentive to report on such things. That said, the revolution in genomics, since the sequencing of DNA from all races, including archaic hominin races, which is a fancy way of saying ancient people, has demonstrated that we are all made up of various species of people that had different blood types, were adapted to different environments, but that does not answer the pivotal question: if we did not come down from the trees, where did humanity come from? Turning to myth and folklore, we have stories of people dwelling in subterranean habitats coming to the surface, such as the Hopi Indian legends. And I have several videos on Inner Earth which explores if it's even possible. And of course, there's no shortage of ancient mythologies and religious stories of some sort of fallen angel or God coming down and mating with earthly or mortal women. From the Book of Enoch to the many stories of Zeus or some other god constantly raping women and their offspring establishing new civilizations, which is how Atlantis allegedly started. Not to mention Crete and the Minoan civilization with Zeus and Europa, the Phoenician princess where Europe gets its name. The genetic findings seem to make much more sense in terms of an advanced branch of humanity hybridizing with more primitive or less technologically advanced cousins, which might sound implausible to some, but at least starts to solve mysteries such as Rh-negative blood type, which modern traditional Darwinian anthropology has no solution for.
People all over this planet for at least 6,000 years have been influenced by extraterrestrials. They have taken the information that is in essentially every school on the planet, and they've modified the information. All history documentation in this country and on every country on the planet have been given lies about astronomy, lies about mathematics. Lies about technical capabilities, lies about the universe, you name it, okay? Everything have been lies. Every PhD on this planet, whether they're scientific, whether they're medical, makes no difference. Every book that they read the 6 years they were in the university are lies. They're not telling the truth. They were not taught the truth. The Secretary of the Navy was aware of this because he had been contacted by Nordic extraterrestrials.
handle the truth. I told you, man. I told you. Don't fuck with me.
Well, it would seem some very strange happenings are going on. First, I remind you to go back in history and remember Donald Rumsfeld's comment the day before the attack of 9/11, where he said that the Pentagon had lost $2.3 trillion, and then just fortunately, then the Pentagon was destroyed the next day on 9/11, 2001. Well, I believe a lot of that money went to go to spending for certain operations for the CIA, FEMA, Homeland Security, and a lot of that was building underground military complex. Fast forward to August of this year, if you remember that D.C. that happened, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and also in Colorado, there's evidence pointing to that not being an earthquake as much as it was probably a nuclear explosion done by the good guys, the Black Ops military, who found out about the evil plans of the globalists that were planning on killing off a huge percentage of the population and going and running and hiding in the military underground complex. So what they've done is cut off some escape routes during that time. And the reason I say it was probably nuclear as opposed to an earthquake is the seismographs show that there were no primary waves associated with these two explosions, and they were very shallow, and also in an area that doesn't receive many earthquakes. Now, the latest report that I'm getting is long about September 20th, 21st, 22nd of this year, there were at least 13 very powerful underground explosions rocking the United States Midwest, and they registered as small shallow earthquakes with the USGS. Many of the underground high explosive detonations registered as 2.6 magnitude earthquakes. So what they're saying is the U.S. military is sealing off the tunnels so that the globalists and the U.S. ghost government, i.e. the Federal Reserve bankers, FEMA, the DHS, CIA, they can't run and hide from what they're predicting to occur here long about September 27th, give or take a day or two of this year, here just real soon. Officers in the U.S. military didn't seem to be aware of Obama and the globalist plan converging on Denver for a DEFCON 1 meeting, meaning nuclear war imminent, a cocked pistol drill. Email was sent to the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations on September 21st of 2011 to alert them to a planned false flag nuclear detonation on U.S. soil somewhere in the American Midwest. The U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations were the ones who raided the Citadel gun and safe store in Las Vegas on August 21st to recover stolen nuclear warhead detonators. They were the ones who intercepted the transfer of improvised nuclear warheads by the CIA in the tunnels that connected the deep underground military bases on August 23, 2011. The impoverished nuclear bombs, the W-54 style warheads, they were being transferred via those tunnels to Washington, D.C. and New York City when they detonated during a firefight between U.S. military personnel and the criminal CIA, DHS, FEMA operatives. It would appear that the U.S. military had a deadline to meet and has already damaged, destroyed, or sealed at least 13 underground tunnels or bases, and perhaps their incentive was the fact that Obama, his shadow government, and the globalists had made plans to save their own hides while leaving the rest of us to fend for ourselves. Perhaps they investigated and confirmed that another false flag nuclear detonation was imminent and acted accordingly to prevent it.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., huh? Goes all the way to Washington, D.C. Yeah, you Homeland Security? Yeah. How far have you taken this down to, how far have you actually ran a load? Miles? Up to Maine? No shit. How many miles do you think that is? Man, that's unbelievable. Not to mention, I heard there's one that goes all the way to Colorado, right? Unbelievable. What do you think you're hauling? Any idea? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Makes all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You don't really know.
Yeah. I know there's been a lot of military stuff being hauled around lately, that's for sure, huh?
Yeah, we deliver to military.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. 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 Well, I appreciate I heard that's water supply, food supply, everything's in there. Huh? Yeah, unbelievable.
You don't get no cell phone for service.
No. Peace, brother. Basically, you got an underground roadway system here that runs all the way to Maine, to Washington, D.C., to Colorado. It's fully stocked. It runs completely underground. And you can see they've been hauling tons of military equipment. You know, they're stocking all these bases. Now, the other thing is the railroad system here is also very strategic. They're bringing in boxcar loads and they're dump shipping here, and they can really deliver to all these locations, which these locations go all the way to Area 51. These locations go all the way to Washington, D.C. There's access underneath the White House to this location, okay? So this is a strategic location, which is really the new command center for the Illuminati and the United States government. Well, forget the United States government. This is a headquarters for the Illuminati. This is where they'll ship most of their supplies. When they go underground, they can stay underground for quite some time. And this is stocked with food, water, everything they need. It's an underground city. So this is the north entrance, and we're going to go see if we can do some more digging.
The following video details the contents of a Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, also known as FM 3-39.40. The document is 325 pages long and it is signed by Joyce E. Morrow, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Army. It was created in 2010, however, has just been recently leaked to the public via the internet and can now be downloaded from multiple sources. The document outlines military procedures for internment and resettlement of civilians, and it describes the layout and the administration of these internment camps. It clearly states on page 38 that it applies within U.S. territory, and it specifically addresses the detainment of U.S. citizens, as is indicated by the identification procedures for new prisoners on page 146, which states that social security numbers are to be recorded alongside their photograph and fingerprints. Included in the list of organizations which may be involved in these internment operations are the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the United Nations. On page 56, the document outlines the responsibilities of psychological operations officers within the camps, among which it states that a PSYOP officer develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes, and identifies political activists. On page 281, the document goes into more detail regarding the role of psychological operations within the camps, specifically in regards to pacifying the population and ensuring cooperation. On page 238, it gives the conditions for the use of deadly force in such camps. Among the justifications for lethal force, it includes to terminate an active escape attempt. That point right there should make it clear that these camps are not benevolent disaster relief type facilities. On page 244, the document calls for the use of snipers during riots to, quote, scan a crowd and identify agitators and riot leaders for apprehension and fire lethal rounds if warranted. On page 260, it shows the basic layout for a facility focusing on detainment. It is depicted with interrogation areas, tribunal areas, and mortuaries. Each detainment facility is designed to hold 4,000 prisoners, and they are depicted with multiple levels of barbed wire separating compartments within the facilities, with a double barbed wire fence enclosing them, and watched over by 24 guard towers. On page 261, the document depicts the layout for what they call civilian resettlement facilities, which are designed to house 8,000 people. Though it uses the word resettlement, the plans show multiple levels of barbed wire dividing the sections of the facility, with double barbed wire fencing on the outside, as well as 16 guard towers. On page 262, the layout for facilities designed for what they call non-compliant prisoners is shown. These camps are designed to hold up to 300 prisoners. They have 3 interrogation centers and are guarded by 13 guard towers.
Now, this first map here is the main surface DUMBs, in other words, near surface, that only go to about 80, 90 miles deep. So that map there shows all of the interconnected tunnel systems along with the primary big huge DUMBs. Like the person in Michigan had asked me about the peninsula, and I told her the DUMB goes under Lake Ontario, the tunnels from it to Lake Superior, where she's seeing lots of kids being grabbed. You can see how those tunnels go under there. Those are actually being cleaned right now. Those tunnel systems, they're going up into Canada, which is, you know, a massive nest of just total satanic mess. And then you can see the connection to Dulce and the big, huge bases in New Mexico and Area 51 and Nevada and all of that. And then you can see the old connection to China Lake, which is all taken out, and the Ridgecrest tunnel system going up through connected to San Francisco and the Presidio, going way up north through Coos Bay in Oregon and up and through Washington.
Oh, I had the mic muted. What the fuck? That's bad. Well, sorry to anybody who's been here for hours and hasn't heard a word I've said. That's so fucked up of me. This is my first stream. Apologies, apologies, apologies. Oh my god.
And all the way up. So all of that's being worked on heavily, as we'll see in this decode. And then this map is the mid-level DUMBs, the more ancient DUMBs. And they figured out, based on their intel, how much flooding all the DUMBs in the world would take. And it would drop the ocean level so vast that it could cause another ice age, because if you drop it too far, you get down into the big currents that circulate through the ocean. Like in the Atlantic, you have the Gulf Stream, and then you have the Horatio current and all of those different currents. And if you upset those currents and the ocean flows, you can literally upset the entire ecosystem of the world. And so they decided they had to use hand-to-hand combat on land, as well as certain advanced techniques that they've just recently come upon, like they took out the dome in Twin Lakes, or Twin Falls rather, excuse me, in which they blew a hole in a lava tube that is part of the supervolcano of Yosemite. And in doing so, they flooded that facility down to the deep domes. Now, this ones are the ones that go extremely deep and are very, very ancient. Back when the Satanics first came here, it goes into a hole that Admiral Byrd went into that is in the Arctic, and all of the bases up in Siberia, the deep, extremely deep satanic bases of the satanic beings and the demons. So what you're seeing here is the demonic stuff, the really deep, really evil stuff. That's why it says at the bottom, Wiccacraft. That's, you know, black magic, Satanism, satanic magic, and all of that, casting, incantations and spells. And all of this is very dark and deep and evil. And so the battle down there is very horrendous, but the connections underneath the ocean are gone. Those have been blown and flooded. So they don't have the maglev trains going from continent to continent anymore.
Ray. Okay, we got that. Let's put this in.
You can't handle the truth.
Oops.
I told you, don't fuck with me.
Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide.
Now, to anybody who didn't hear me last time, I know you didn't because I had my mic muted. These deep underground military bases are absolutely real. I don't know what they're used for, but they're absolutely real.
It would take a year to 2 years to build each one, and now they're capable of building a couple of them a year with sophisticated methods. My colleague, Al Bielik, has actually been on some of the high-speed railways, the magneto-leviton trains that connect all the deep underground military bases within the United States. He's been on a Mach 2 train and floats off a single rail at a 3/4 of an inch off the rail, and is what you call high tech. We have nothing like this on the surface. Groom Lake is where the infamous Area 51, S4, S2, a CIA base. It was originally a bombing range, a nuclear test site. It was later become the most secret base in the United States. It employs over 18,000 workers who work in shifts of 12 hours at a whack. Most of them work in the cover of darkness, like us. We built out 9 underground military bases there, each with an average capacity capable of basically a city underground, roughly 4¼ cubic miles hollowed out underground.
4 miles.
They have boring machines, for instance. They don't bore, they literally vitrify and melt the rock, deflagrate the rock. It's a very
That machine right there is the same one that Elon Musk's boring company has.
It reduces the rock to a powder and then melts the remaining rock as a coating on the inside of the base, so you don't have to use gunite, cements, and other kinds of things like that. That's all old hat now. Technology is just basically the new technology we get is the old hat of the military. Anyway, after we drilled all 4 holes, it's about 2 days to drill all 4 of them. And when you build an underground base, you drill 4 basic holes, and then you build called stopes or cross-member holes across, and then you use blasting equipment and special blasting equipment by the analyzation of the rock formation, and you literally blast out or tunnel out or deflagrate or melt rock out to build the large rooms that are required for this
Flaggerate.
underground base. I was involved in building another base.
I wonder if that's associated with the word slag.
Inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos.
Like lava rock, like when you melt metal,
biological
you get slag.
laboratory. On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. Then to the southwest of that, we were in the process of the early stages of building. We drilled 4 large tunnel-like holes. Some of them ran 2.5 miles under the surface. At that time, number of the original wells or drilling machines that were used were the rate of 2 miles a day. Area 51 is only one base, one of the 131 bases. Of these 131 bases, I call Area 51 a mega base. It's got more than one base in it. It's Tonopah Test Range, Area 51, S2, S4, Groom Lake, and a host of
Area
others.
51 is just the one we know about, the one that got caught.
These mega bases are gobbling up our gross national product. Right now we're spending 28% of the gross national product on building underground bases solely.
There's your black budget and your unaccounted
That
for
doesn't
losses.
count for the defense budget. That doesn't count for the spare parts budget. It doesn't count for any of that at all. And the black budget is dead wrong. It sidesteps the United States Congress and its Constitution of its people.
Yes, sir.
And says you're a bunch of morons, you don't need to know. Well, a need-to-know basis is an executive order written during the Eisenhower era, right after the created 1954 treaty, and is treasonous and illegal in this country and should be overturned and abolished. All this alien thing is fine, except for one thing. Alien takeover is a serious threat. Kept totally out of the public view, off the surface, I'm sure the underground bases, without question, are being used as a place to house alien takeover. Alien takeover means the implementation of a one-world government.
Does it? Does it? Are those two things correlated?
Whole series of underground tunnels.
That's correct.
And that they go all over the planet, essentially.
Those which go in other parts of the planet are probably not built by us, they're just being used. They're reconnected, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The tunnels have been utilized by us that were already there. And much of the system, which started to be built in 1959 by the various contracting organizations to the military, was for the underground tunnel system, communication system, as connected with the bases they were building for the aliens. Now, there are other tunnels which have existed for a long period of time, and there are other cities underground which have existed for a very long period of time. They may well have been interconnected.
Now, Al, you've been actually in this underground subway. We'll just
Yes.
call it a subway. Can you describe for our listeners what this subway looks like? Do you have memories of that?
Yeah, there were standard platforms where you went in. Once you got into the system, there was no problem. You could go anywhere, but the thing was you had to be cleared to get to it, and you had to get far enough underground because the entrances were not on the surface.
Right, but physically, what did the apparatus, the vehicles look like? Did it look like just a regular subway?
No, they're highly streamlined. The best comparison I could give is the pictures that have been shown of the Japan's bullet train. They were built very much like that, highly streamlined.
Were they?
So they say that they're like 3 or 5 miles under the ground. So let me get my thoughts straight. Sorry, I'm just gonna play it. I was curious how deep that Russian super deep hole is that they drilled. I'm gonna look it up really quick. Because I think in a minute he's gonna say how far deep these bases are in the ground, and I'm curious how deep the mantle is, the crust, the mantle, and the Russian super deep hole, borehole. That's it. The Kola super deep borehole, which to my dyslexic brain looked like butthole. How deep it is. May 24th, 1970. Okay, so it looks like 31,000 feet, almost 40,000 feet. Sorry, there's a different measurement. Okay, so almost 40,000 feet. God damn it, I don't know how many miles that is. How many meters in a mile? One mile is the same as, okay. Okay, so the Kola super deep is like 4 miles deep, less than 4 miles deep. And let's see, how to mantle. How thick is the crust and mantle? Holy shit. Okay. The crust is only about 3 to 5 miles. And about 25. Holy shit. All right. So it's like 25 miles deep if we're on the ground, but if we go to like the bottom of the ocean, it's only like 3 to 5 miles. The mantle is about 1,800 miles thick. All right, so if the super deep's only 4 miles deep, we have not even cracked the crust. That's super interesting. So I'm wondering if these super deep, these DUMBs, deep underground military bases, if they are if they're in the mantle or the crust, which it appears that they are in the crust still. Okay, sorry to tangent. Here we go. Let's go.
They were comfortable. They weren't spacious, no. because of the fact that the total bore size was 14 feet in diameter, the train had to fit in that. Had to be suspended over the tracks because it wasn't driven by wheels, it was magnetic levitation.
It was only 14 feet in diameter?
That's right.
That's right.
So that's
what I said.
The train was fairly small.
If you had claustrophobia, that would not be good.
Very
so
true.
That's actually smaller than the airplane. Then.
Well, that all came about because of the boring equipment that was built.
Originally.
Mm-hmm.
Later borings are much bigger. The Russians built bigger ones. We've built bigger ones since because the nuclear boring machine, there's no limit to the size you can build it, and there have been tunnels bored 40 and 50 feet in diameter.
Okay.
Hey, damn, that's
you,
huge.
Larry? Have you ever been in any of these underground subways?
Not on the subway per se. I've seen it, didn't get on it, but I've been in a few of the cities.
A few of the cities?
Yes, there's whole cities.
Underground?
Underground, yes.
What do they look like?
They're some, it depends on where you're at. Some are rather small, like the size of, say, a large office building. You know, like tunneled inside of the side of a mountain. Some get into huge expanses of, literally miles. And it is a large city underground, with buildings and everything.
Who live in these cities?
Your mom.
You get a combination. You got humans, of course, but
Don't you
also
dare.
have aliens too.
I fucking knew it.
Yeah, what kind of aliens?
Lizard people too, I bet.
Well, there's several different kinds of aliens.
Well, we all know that.
Oh, yes, we do.
Many different kinds, and we're still trying.
And just about all of them are there.
They're all there, huh?
What is this, Rick and Morty?
I told you, don't fuck.
Men in Black, I mean. Oh my god. I wonder if the Men in Black base is DUMBs.
Underground cities called DUMBs. DUMB is an acronym for
DUMBs.
Deep Underground Military Bases. The government calls them DUMBs to mock us because they think we're too dumb to figure out what DUMBs really are.
I seriously doubt that's why.
We're dumb, all right. We're dumb enough to trust the government. How big are these deep underground bases? According to eyewitnesses, they're about the size of a medium-sized city, and they're anywhere from 10 miles to 30 miles across, with an average depth of 4¼ miles. Wow. In America alone, there's at least 140 of them, and most of the tunneling activity is under military installations. These underground cities have reportedly been under construction day and night since the 1940s. Worldwide, there's about 1,500 of them. The Northrop facility in Antelope Valley, California, is rumored to be 42 levels deep. Ex-employees and whistleblowers describe what sounds like the underground setting for a science fiction movie. Tunnel machines that dig a mile of tunnel big enough for a 2-lane highway in a matter of minutes. High-speed magnetic levitation trains traveling between underground cities at fantastic speeds of up to 1,500 miles per hour. Are these ex-employees just making up these stories to get attention and publicity? Who are they, and what are their credentials? One of them is Richard Sauder, who wrote a book called Underground Bases and Tunnels. What is the government trying to hide? Sauder has an architectural PhD, and he's worked for a number of government agencies. His book describes a nuclear power laser drill called the Subterrane, capable of drilling an underground tunnel 7 miles long in a single day. It literally melts the rock away that's in its path and leaves behind a smooth, glazed, glass-like surface around the edges of the tunnels. Another credible witness is a retired U.S. Air Force Colonel, L. Fletcher Prouty. He wrote a book in 1973 called The Secret Team, explaining how underground cities are hidden from public view. So don't expect revolving glass doors and red carpets at the entrances and exits to these facilities. From 1955 to 1963, Prouty was the liaison between the CIA and the Department of Defense for military support of special operations. The Secret Team, which he names after his book, is a powerful, brutally violent international team that overthrows and influences governments all over the globe. Prouty compares it to a sprawling octopus, with the U.S. and the world in its deadly grasp. At the core of the Secret Team are members of the CIA, the National Security Council, military and civilian officials, as well as academics, business, and even media people. Each underground city is said to employ 10,000 to 18,000 workers and cost between $17 and $26 billion to build. Where does all that money come from? It comes from a concealed black budget that garners 25% of the gross U.S. national product, and it currently consumes $1.25 trillion per year. Ever wonder what happened to the trillions in so-called losses after the bankster crooks fleeced the world's major financial institutions, then got rewarded with taxpayer bailouts? Ever wonder what happens to the billions that they pocket from Afghanistan's opium trade and from the legal and illegal drug money? In Tim Weiner's book, The Blank Check, The Pentagon's Black Budget, he writes, "There are two governments in the United States today. One is visible, the other is invisible. The first is the government that citizens read about in their local newspapers, and the second is highly secretive, interlocking agencies that carry out hidden agendas." Rumor has it that DUMBs are populated with aliens. Philip Schneider, an ex-government structural engineer, was involved in building deep underground military bases around the United States. For the last 2 years of his life, he gave public lectures about government cover-ups, black budgets, UFOs, and yes, aliens. On January 17, 1996, Schneider was found dead in his apartment with piano wire wrapped around his neck.
He probably
Some
killed
say he
himself.
was tortured and murdered in a military-style execution. James Casbolt is another whistleblower.
MI6.
Casbolt was a former MI6 agent who worked in Black Ops in London between 1995 and 1999. He has connections to ex-intelligence people who worked in underground bases and on ET-related projects. There are vast numbers of children and adults disappearing around the world and ending up in these underground bases, says Casbolt, who claims he has seen aliens firsthand. After learning all of this, the trillion-dollar question that needs to be asked is, why in hell are governments building a global underground network of cities with interconnecting tunnels? Why has Norway built a highly fortified and heavily guarded underground seed repository?
Oh, that one's easy.
Is there something they're
That
not
one seems like an
telling
obvious
us?
necessary.
Are they expecting a global disaster?
Yes,
An
we are.
apocalypse? An engineered biological or nuclear war?
Okay, first of all, yes, we should always be prepared for that. We shouldn't wait until it's a definite thing before we start saving seeds.
Or a pole shift? How about an ice age? Or some other catastrophic depopulating event?
Wink, wink.
Whistleblower George Green believes an imminent nuclear war is being orchestrated by the global elite to reduce the world's population to 500 million. He believes that underground cities are a retreat for the global elite. If Green is right, what do these underground retreats come equipped with? Hydroponic grow-ops? Luxury spas? Hyperbaric oxygen chambers? Pubs? Fountains? Roman baths,
Isn't that the shit
perhaps?
Goku trained in?
With their stolen trillions, they can even simulate starry night skies and sunny days, just like at your local planetarium. Since underground cities are reportedly capable of accommodating millions, not billions, of people, guess who's got reservations in these subterranean resorts?
Probably Hillary
If you
Clinton.
confront government agencies about any of this, they won't try to deny the existence of underground facilities. They just wave it off as storage and defense. But what if whistleblowers like Casbolt, Sauder, Prouty, and Schneider are all telling the truth? What if a hidden, secret global network of underground cities, tunnels, and maglev trains really do exist? And what if sinister plans by the ruling elite also exist? One can only guess that the stuff they're doing way down there isn't for the benefit of humankind, since none of us have reservations or even a
In the
timeshare.
underground bases, what they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases, another absolutely beyond top secret research facilities. This technology that is necessary to totally entrap humanity through technology is being developed. And they are always vastly ahead.
Where's my
of
protractor?
anything that's happening in the public arena. I mean, vastly ahead.
Wiener, wiener, wiener,
This is why
wiener,
Aldous
wiener.
Huxley could describe things in 1932 with Brave New World that were not even possible then. This is why George Orwell could describe technology in 1984, published in 1948, like the telescreens
find
in
my
your
protractor.
home constantly filming.
I can't
you.
protract
What
without
smart TVs do now, and these are only the early developments of the telescreens, the smart TVs. They were able to perceive these things because this technology is always well ahead outside the public arena than it is in the public arena. I've quoted people in my books, like a guy in 1969 at Rockefeller Insider, who described in great detail how the world was going to change, and he has been absolutely spot on in every single way in detail. And one of the things he said in 1969 is that he described the internet. He described the internet in 1969. It wasn't even discovered, we're told, until the 1980s, was it? But it's always long ahead of where we are in the public arena. Why? Because as the process unfolds of more and more sophisticated technology rolling out, like now at a vast rate of knots, to create this complete human control system, there are no gaps. Notice, there's no lag time, there's no gaps where people are sitting around strumming their fingers waiting for some geek in a garage to develop the next level of control. It just rolls out seamlessly. Why? Because it's been there, sitting there, to be rolled out, so it's seamless as it rolls out. This stream of movies, year after year after year after year, that are portraying the very dystopian machine-controlled society that they want to take us into. Because it's called preemptive programming. What they're doing is systematically making us subconsciously,
automatic,
subconsciously familiar with that world. So that as it comes in for real, it's less of a chasm, it's less of a shock. Now, because this technology ain't coming from geeks in garages, I mean, some of the peripheral stuff might, yes. I'm talking about the real control system stuff. It's coming out of underground military bases and other secret projects. They need a cover story and a cover people to explain where the hell it's coming from. So they have their cult operatives, gophers, most of them, well, all of them are at gopher level, even then, or some are more gophers than others. And they play the role.
Gophers because they're hiding underground, I guess.
Different technologies coming out. I'm talking about the main technologies that are real vital to the control system.
Or gophers because they go for tasks and they're
acting as that front man, the front woman, makes them very rich. But this is the deal. You front up this particular technology rolling out as if it's, random, and you'll become very, very rich. But vast amounts of that wealth have to be spent on advancing the cult agenda.
Exactly.
In the name of philanthropy.
That's how they get you.
This is why you get these heartless, psychopathic billionaires setting up foundations. Look, he's got a foundation he gives to charity. Well, just follow the frickin' charities and follow what they're doing. And you'll find that it's a cult agenda that he's financing, whether it's Monsanto or his vaccinations and the manipulation of health, but particularly vaccinations. What they're saying is they want to tag every child, like in the third world, to have a digital way of seeing if they've been vaccinated or not. Well, because of this pandemic, they now said, oh, yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to have a way of knowing who's been vaccinated. And the idea is that they'll have technology, and if you haven't been vaccinated, then it will be picked up by the technology. This is the idea. So here we have Bill Gates saying now, this lockdown can't end until everyone in the world is vaccinated. They're his words.
Vaccinate.
And who else has come out with new computer models saying, oh no, we can't have the lockdown until the vaccine? Professor Neil Ferguson, whose models caused the lockdown in the first place, a man funded in terms of many of his projects and operations by Bill Gates. How intelligent do you have to be to make vast amounts of money if you know when the market's going up and you know when the market's going down? Because those making it go up and making it go down are telling you. You don't have to be intelligent at all. You make vast amounts of money. So Soros makes vast amounts of money. But this is the deal, you do that, but you need to spend massive amounts of it advancing the agenda. So he has this Open Society Foundation network, and the last time I looked, he'd already handed over to it $32 billion. This manipulates people's revolutions that aren't revolutions. It's massively involved in funding mass migration, which is another part of this agenda. He funds the whole woke arena of transgender and political correctness and all this stuff, climate change. So that's his. And this is how it works.
Antarctic stinkholes.
As well as methane, there's one more clue that links Easy Lake and the Amal craters. Both are located on the same type of frozen terrain: permafrost. Most permafrost is found in the land masses of high northern latitudes, including Russia, Canada, and most of Alaska, covering an area almost as large as the US and Canada combined. Permafrost can stretch almost a mile beneath Earth's surface.
Sheesh.
It's defined as any ground whose temperature remains at or below 32 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 or more consecutive years. But it
permanently frosted
for millennia. Recently, rising Arctic temperatures have meant that in some regions, the permafrost has started to thaw. Just how fast, and the danger this may pose to our climate, is revealed 450 miles from Easy Lake. Near the town of Fox, in interior Alaska, something strange is happening in the woods.
This is what people refer to as this drunken forest. You can see a bunch of these have kind of started to go. They're just having a hard time getting enough rooting in to grow straight.
This forest sits on top of permafrost. Scientist Tom Douglas has been tracking some surprising changes taking place as the permafrost starts to thaw.
I mean, look at those huge birch trees. They're literally just
That's a
riding
huge
down
birch.
those slopes as it's all degrading. I mean, this goes a good 20 or so meters below us. This is a giant hole. You can hear water in there. This whole landscape is just very slowly sliding downhill with gravity. This is a very dramatic and very rapid change in the landscape here that, again, we're seeing in a matter of years, not decades, not 20 years, not by 2100, since 2018. It's pretty dramatic.
This rapid thaw is also affecting human settlements, like Utqiagvik, the most northern city in the United States. This entire community sits on top of the Alaskan permafrost. Locals call it the top of the world.
If you point that way, that's Greenland over there. Canada is over here. And that way is, guess what? Russia.
Gordon Brower is a native Alaskan Inupiaq whaling captain. His people have lived in this region for thousands of years.
Communities like these, they're special. A lot of the cultures in the world are assimilated, and we're assimilated here, but we've brought our culture and our ways to the future with us. And you can come here and still see the same celebration that took place 10,000 years ago.
100,000 years ago, before Sigourney Weaver.
Waters. Part of an ancient Inupiaq tradition of living off the land and the sea.
We don't have Walmart, or we don't have McDonald's up here. We have other small restaurants and other things to do like that. But the majority of food resources are still hunted today. Seals, whales, belugas, ducks, geese, caribou, wolves. All of those are still traded and used.
With little fresh food available in winter, generations of native Alaskans have depended on cellars carved out of the permafrost.
Well, we're in an ice cellar. My folks used this ice cellar for years and years. This is where I put a whale and store it in trust for
You
the
say a
community.
whale?
But thawing permafrost means this natural deep freeze isn't as cold as it used to be. As Brower discovered.
I had checked on the meat and told my brothers, you know, we gotta pull that meat out. It's greening, and we don't want that. And I've resorted to pulling a whole whale out of there and putting it into walk-in freezers.
Thawing ice cellars aren't the
I wonder how
only
you'd even
threat
get one of
rising
those back on
temperatures
the
pose to this community. Recently,
back
sea
on
ice
the
that used to protect the shore from storms has begun to
beach.
melt.
Or in the
Storm
fucking
surge
cellar. Like
is
seriously.
pretty dramatic.
I guess you'd chop it up where it
it's
is
gonna
and then
wreak
carry it.
havoc on your coastline here. And the thing about it is, when it's reaching the edge, a lot of the banks are permafrost rich, and it undercuts them.
Exposed by the storms, permafrost is thawing and crumbling away. Now, communities like Utqiagvik are trying to protect their homes.
These are all our local efforts to stop the storm surge. This is our way of trying to save the town.
With a retreating coastline and warming ice cellars, local
I get distracted
communities
too
are hit
easy.
twice by thawing permafrost. But the big thaw is an Arctic-wide problem.
Through the next decades and century, we expect anywhere across the Arctic between 30 and 70% of near-surface permafrost will be lost. That range partly has to do with just some uncertainty in the science, but largely has to do with how much warming will happen in the future.
Arctic communities are facing the immediate effects now. But scientists are concerned this loss has implications for the entire planet. So why is permafrost thaw so dangerous? And what is the link to methane? Back near Fox in interior Alaska, Tom Douglas is about to do something only
What does
possible
methane
in
stand?
a few
Never
places
mind.
on
That's
Earth.
stupid. Methane is a gas. That's
Walk deep down
thinking
into the
methanol.
permafrost itself. The Fox permafrost tunnel reveals there's more to permafrost than frozen Earth.
3 more of these motherfuckers to go.
That's a horn. That's from the longhorn steppe bison, and they are extinct now, but back 18 to
Longhorn
40,000
stunt
years
bison.
ago, you know, there were
Steppe
steppe bison
bison.
here.
Steppe.
Pretty exciting. This is a mammoth bone right here. You can just see kind of the piece of it sticking out right there. It's pretty big.
The tunnel reveals that permafrost contains vast quantities of organic matter.
So these are sedges, kind of like grass, and you can see that they're green. They still have their chlorophyll in them. They're also upside down. This block fell into a water feature that then froze.
That's kind of cool.
Probably 20 or so thousand years ago.
Inverted grass.
This ancient organic matter, like all life on our planet, contains carbon.
Weird that they're green, but I guess
the
root system's in
system called
pointed
the
towards
carbon
the sun.
cycle. As they grow, plants absorb carbon dioxide. When they die, they, or the animals that have eaten them, decompose, releasing some of this carbon back into the atmosphere. But in the freezing Arctic, decomposition happens slowly. So over millennia, a huge amount of organic matter became permafrost before it could decompose. It's carbon frozen in time.
In the late 90s into the 2000s, people start to look at the stocks of carbon in permafrost, and it's a lot. It's about 1,400 billion metric tons. It's almost twice as much carbon as is currently in Earth's atmosphere. When we walked in, we noted that smell, right? You're smelling ancient bacteria and carbon being oxidized. It's almost like I've heard anything from like a French cheese to barnyard.
Yeah,
it's kind of
that's
that
what I kind of
organic,
was thinking.
almost a late fall, wet leaf kind of organic smell.
Oh.
You are smelling permafrost carbon being oxidized. And so the big question is that carbon that we smell that's all over this tunnel walls, what's its ultimate fate? And there's a lot of people working on that.
In other words, how much of this carbon will end up in the atmosphere? And most importantly, how fast? Falmouth, Massachusetts. 3,000 miles from the ice tunnel, Arctic ecologist Susan Natali investigates samples of permafrost to find out what happens when it thaws.
So these are permafrost cores that were collected from different locations across Alaska. Some of these are really dark, like particularly this one, and that dark color means that has a lot of carbon in it.
As permafrost warms, its carbon thaws, and the carbon cycle starts up once again.
So that carbon then is available for microbes to break down. They use it for energy and they decompose it, and in that process they're releasing carbon dioxide or methane.
Carbon dioxide and methane are both greenhouse gases. As Earth's surface absorbs energy from the sun, it radiates some of it back out as heat. In the atmosphere, greenhouse gases absorb this heat, radiating part of its energy back at Earth and heating up our planet.
Greenhouse gases are a concern because they trap heat. They're helpful to us because they make this habitable planet, but because there's too much in the atmosphere, they're now making this an uninhabitable planet or a less habitable planet.
It's estimated that in the mid-18th century,
The less habitable planet thing, I can't prove that it's not true,
carbon-based greenhouse gases in the
but
atmosphere.
I don't want to live in a planet
With
where
industrialization,
the
human
people who
made
have more
greenhouse
money
gas
than me get to
emissions
live
began
on the
add to
planet,
this
but I
cycle.
have to
By
be
2019,
restrictive with
it's
my
estimated the
use
total
while
had
they do
risen to
not.
over
We do it as a
3,000
planet, I'm
gigatons.
cool with it, but
Over the last century and
the
a half,
rules for me,
Earth's
not for
average
the
temperature
bullshit.
increased around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists agree human emissions caused this warming. But recently, they've become concerned greenhouse gases being released by permafrost might be driving temperatures higher too.
As the name suggests, permafrost is permanently frozen ground. So we thought, okay, this carbon
Obviously,
is
it's not
very
that
stable,
permanently.
so nothing is going to happen. But as permafrost starts to thaw, this carbon becomes vulnerable.
Since the mid-70s, carbon dioxide emissions from the North Alaskan wilderness have spiked by
I guess
more
she's
than
making
70%.
sense of the global warming argument, but obviously
while
I
we
don't know
know
the
a lot
science,
about
and
carbon dioxide, the
PBS stands
impact
for
of
pure
another
bullshit,
greenhouse gas
so
coming out of the permafrost
I have
is
to look
less
into that
widely
myself
known.
before I
The
make
very
any
one
claims.
escaping from the Yamal and Easy Lake. Methane.
Methane is really important because it's much more potent in terms of its ability to trap heat. So it's about 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide.
No more
Luckily,
cow farts.
while carbon dioxide lasts centuries or longer in our atmosphere, methane only lasts around 12 years. But as a far more potent greenhouse gas, any large-scale increases in methane emissions have climate scientists seriously concerned. For now, more than half of methane emissions come from human sources like fossil fuels and agriculture.
And human farts.
Sources well understood by climate experts. But scientists are increasingly worried about methane emissions from permafrost. So far, they don't know how much methane
I'm gonna
the
look into
permafrost
fair
is
use.
releasing. And that's
see
a big problem.
see how that works, like how
In
much
order
commentary I have to do.
control our temperature, we have a certain amount of
The
carbon
stream
that
seems to be
humans
doing
can
fine
release.
with
That's
just
our carbon
audio from
budget.
from these
In
other videos.
2015, the International Paris Agreement set a target for limiting global warming. Its goal was to keep the temperature rise to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Well below 2.
To stand a good chance of remaining below the 1.5 degree mark, one estimate states that humans could release a maximum of around 460 gigatons more carbon dioxide. But recent climate calculations are based on computer models with incomplete information.
Unfortunately, a lot of these Earth system models that contribute to such goals do not take into account CO2 and methane emissions from permafrost.
The most recent carbon budgets have started to include permafrost carbon. But some scientists believe they still underestimate the amount of carbon the warming Arctic will release, making temperature goals harder to meet, and putting more pressure on societies to dramatically cut their emissions to compensate.
So we think we have a certain amount of greenhouse gases that humans can release, but our target is wrong right now because we're not accounting for potential permafrost emissions of methane and carbon dioxide.
Understanding the dynamics of thawing permafrost is now critical to predicting our climate future. So how much methane is permafrost emitting each year? And is this annual amount going to increase?
Good dog. Go ahead. I'm by.
At least I've been averaging
Fairbanks,
one viewer.
Interior Alaska. Ecologist Katie Walter Anthony is heading out
Done a
onto
good
the
3-hour
frozen
stream
terrain.
though. That's pretty good.
Come on, Piggy. Come on.
Walter Anthony
Let's do
was
a
among the
24-hour
first to study
stream.
Easy
That would
Lake.
be nuts. We're not
She's
gonna do
found
that though.
concerning evidence. It's not
Not
the
today.
only lake in the permafrost region that's releasing methane.
So when you spear the spot, if I hear gas coming out, I'm going to try to ignite it. And if there's fire, we both need to get out of the way.
Okay.
Just fucking run if there's fire. Oof.
Whoa.
Ah!
That got me.
Oh, shoot.
Oh dang.
I'm on fire.
No, I was wondering.
She is.
Let's smoke
Oh,
it.
it's a stick.
You
Oh
okay?
boy.
That's a good one.
That was a good one.
All right.
The methane comes from organic matter in permafrost, thawing and decomposing at the bottom of the lake, then rising in methane bubbles to the surface. Across the Arctic, permafrost thaw is generating vast numbers of new lakes. As the soil warms, ice beneath the surface melts, causing the ground to slump and fill with water.
And once a lake is formed, you can't stop it because that water has heat and it causes the ground to thaw so fast.
The lakes then start releasing methane.
As the methane escapes, it causes more permafrost to thaw and more methane to be generated, which is more warming, and you get what's called a positive feedback cycle.
Positive feedback cycles from permafrost regions are another scenario not sufficiently accounted for in current climate models.
As permafrost thaws, greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane will be released back to the atmosphere much faster.
Myth.
Warming
I already
is
said
causing
that
more
before.
warming.
I just like saying it. Myth.
Due to positive feedback, permafrost emissions could increase the rate of warming, compounding the need for humans to reduce their emissions if climate targets are to be met.
I'm cool
But
with reducing
permafrost
my carbon footprint,
isn't the only potential
but
driver
I
of
am
a
not
positive
cool
feedback
with
cycle.
Jeff Bezos telling me that I have to, so he can keep being Jeff
Permafrost
Bezos.
is actually not the largest carbon reserve on Earth. There's much larger carbon reserve in Earth's crust as fossil carbon, but we often don't talk about this carbon. This is because this carbon is considered very stable.
But some scientists now wonder if this mega source of carbon is as stable as they thought. Disturbing evidence comes from the bubbles in Easy Lake. Methane released by thawing permafrost has a particular chemical fingerprint. When the scientists at Easy Lake studied the methane in the bubbles, they discovered it originated deeper inside Earth. Much deeper. Miles beneath the permafrost, deep in Earth's crust, lie huge fossil methane reservoirs. While methane from permafrost comes from organic matter thousands of years old, fossil methane comes from organisms that decomposed millions of years ago. But if it's miles beneath the surface, how is this methane getting through Earth's crust? And why here? Above ground, the landscape itself gives scientists a clue.
Looking up at the peaks around here and studying the local geology, we know that this is a highly fractured and faulted region.
As of 2021, Alaska is the most seismically active state in the U.S.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
In the territory close to Easy Lake, scientists have discovered a network of geological fault lines. Although not on a tectonic plate boundary, movements of Earth's crust have caused it to crack here. The closest fault line discovered so far is fewer than 5 miles from the lake. Fault lines make cracks in Earth's crust through which fossil methane can rise to the surface. Though it hasn't been confirmed, the scientists suspect a fault line lies near, or directly beneath, Easy Lake. But if so, there's a mystery. Seismic evidence from the area suggests Easy Lake sits above 500 feet of still frozen permafrost. This should form a rock-solid frozen barrier trapping the fossil methane inside Earth.
But there's a hole.
So how are these deep stocks of greenhouse gas breaking through to the surface? So far, the team's sonar scan has revealed a 50-foot hole in the lake floor. But what if they could look deeper, into the permafrost itself? Geophysicist Nick Hassan joins the team, with technology used by the military.
75's just after the shrub.
I'm essentially scanning the permafrost using a geophysical method called very low frequency.
Very low frequency, or VLF,
I knew
measures
that
a
was
special
coming.
kind of electromagnetic wave as it moves through Earth. These waves are sent out globally by the Navy to communicate with submarines. But as those waves pass through the earth below, Hassan's equipment can pick them up. By measuring the speed the wave travels, Hassan can tell whether the ground deep beneath him is frozen or not.
When it moves through the ground, if there's permafrost or ice, these waves are coming up against a lot of resistance. But if there's no permafrost or ice, it quickly moves through.
If they're strong enough, the electromagnetic VLF waves should enable Hassan to see whatever lies beneath the lake.
And so we can scan the Earth similar to how a doctor scans you with an MRI.
Easy Lake is the biggest on-land methane seep yet found in the Arctic. But no one has used VLF to look beneath it. Until now.
Wow, fantastic signals. Yeah, so I'm starting to notice a change.
I've not been looking at it, but I thought we were talking about permafrost, and then he's out on a lake saying I noticed some change.
Right here where I'm located. And the VLF is picking it up. It's very exciting. The signals are just outstanding.
Getting super excited.
Back at camp, Hassan takes the first ever high-resolution glimpse beneath Easy Lake. This slice through 500 feet of ground below the lake reveals an anomaly.
So the dark blue is the permafrost region. So anything that's light blue to red is thawed. And so this
green to red
permafrost covering
permafrost
this entire area.
head.
But for some reason, what you can see here is a thaw chimney going from somewhere below 150 meters.
Ancient
To
chimneys.
the surface, where we see the
created by
rising
aliens.
bubbles. And so this is really unique.
So far, the scientists have only seen 50 feet beneath the lake. Now, Hassan's VLF image lets them look 10 times deeper.
That's very low frequency for anybody who wasn't here 10
Below
seconds
the lake
ago.
stretches a deep layer of permafrost. But the scientists now know this hasn't just thawed at the surface. Instead, a chimney of material has thawed right through the frozen permafrost. A warmer, semi-permeable passageway through which fossil methane rises to the surface. So thawing permafrost means not one, but two sources of methane for our atmosphere. As it warms, permafrost releases its own methane gas. And as thaw chimneys form within it, they provide an escape route for fossil methane that has been safely trapped for millions of years. Scientists estimate there are around 1.3 trillion tons of methane stored beneath the Arctic. That's nearly 250 times as much methane as there is in Earth's atmosphere today. So is Easy Lake's thaw chimney unique? Or is fossil methane escaping elsewhere? While the leak in Easy Lake is unusually large, smaller seeps of fossil methane are being discovered across the Arctic. In Alaska alone, over 70 sites have been found. There's no current sign the entire reserve of fossil methane is moving toward the surface. But the appearance of even small amounts of this ancient greenhouse gas has some scientists concerned.
If permafrost thaws, then that's a scary wild card in the climate change story, because we think there's a huge amount of methane and natural gas trapped inside permafrost and under permafrost. So if permafrost becomes like Swiss cheese with lots of holes in it, then you can have chimneys where that gas is erupting out. And that is not included in climate models.
If only a tiny fraction of the fossil reservoirs were to reach the atmosphere, it could intensify.
Oh my god, like 2 days ago?
Putting even more pressure
fucking
on human emissions targets.
How fast that's going to happen and just how much methane will come out, we don't know.
Probably enough for you to get your fucking agenda across.
Scientists don't currently understand how fast such a cycle might occur. or what it would look like. But there's one place on Earth that gives a chilling example of how a human-made permafrost feedback cycle actually works. Northeast Siberia is home to the Chersky Mountains. In the 1960s, in a place called Batagayka, a stretch of forest was cleared to make a road. Stripped of its tree cover, the permafrost was exposed to the warming sun. As it thawed, the ground sank, pulling down trees at its edge and exposing more permafrost. A positive feedback cycle.
Like a Siberian nesting doll
The strip of
of
cleared forest
permafrost.
is a depression nearly 300 feet deep and over half a mile wide. And it's growing. Scientists call it a mega slump.
Batagayka, it is very big, but the size is because of the initial human impact. And this one is already more than 1 kilometer and growing every summer.
Batagayka reveals how a small human impact can
That's
start
interesting.
a devastating feedback cycle in permafrost.
The ground rot.
Scientists are now trying to discover what a feedback cycle could mean for the entire permafrost region, and whether it could reach a point where it becomes irreversible. Such a phenomenon is called a tipping point.
A tipping point is the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. You can get away with adding straw for so long, and then you can't. And the tipping point is the point of no return.
It's a controversial idea among climate scientists, but the prospect of a tipping point has been raised for a number of global climate systems, including Arctic sea ice and deforestation in the Amazon. So far, there's no conclusive evidence that a tipping point is near for permafrost. However, some scientists believe aspects of the thaw are now irreversible. Vladimir Romanovsky has spent decades studying the changing permafrost. Near Utqiagvik in northern Alaska, he investigates what happens as large wedges of ice in the ground start to melt.
Before it was more or less flat area, but then ice melts and surface subsides.
Romanovsky believes lakes formed by melting permafrost ice have passed a point of no return.
It took tens of thousands of years to put this ice into the ground. Now it's melting. To put all this ice into the ground back, you will need several tens of thousands of years. So that's, for humans, definitely irreversible process. It is tipping point.
While melting ice forms lakes in the wilderness, just a few miles away, it's causing very different problems for the local community. In the roads outside Utqiagvik, the effects of rising Arctic temperatures are easy to see.
Just from observation, growing up here, coming out here since I was a kid, the roads were a lot higher than they are now.
How would you know that?
It is literally sinking. His bumper might get wet.
Native Alaskan Inupiaq Lars Nelson is an infrastructure consultant. He knows firsthand what permafrost thaw is doing to his community.
This road is for subsistence use. We come out here and stage our hunts. It's a big part of our history, and it's important that we're able to access it in case of an emergency.
And it's not just the roads that are sinking. In downtown Utqiagvik, Nelson meets Inupiaq Anthony Edwardson.
These ones are subsiding too? Yeah.
He's an expert on the Inupiaq community with 4 decades experience in the construction industry.
Yeah, look at this one is really messed up. Look at how it's just...
That's where the houses are sinking.
Oh shit.
Local houses are built
I guess
on
that is
wooden
pretty
pilings.
visible.
If they were built on the ground, the heat used to warm the homes would thaw the permafrost below. But now the permafrost is thawing by itself, and the pilings are starting to sink.
When the piling is a very small base, it doesn't hold its structure.
The communities, they need house leveling, move houses. Houses need to be torn down. We're in the middle of a housing crisis.
Nelson believes strategic building is the answer.
We're on to it right now, and we're refining it right now. We can build nice, good, healthy homes. We just got to pay attention to our foundation, pay attention to the tundra we're building on more closely, because it's such an awesome spot, you know? It's the top of the world.
But as the permafrost continues to thaw, others in Alaska are looking at more drastic solutions.
So this is our portable, adjustable sled base home. It is on a giant steel sled as opposed to pilings.
CEO of the Regional Housing Authority, Griffin Hagel, has a more radical plan for sinking homes.
What we would do if we needed to move this, we would be hooking up our tow chains to these two attachment points. We've got one on this side and one on that corner of the building over there. Hook that up to a piece of heavy equipment, Caterpillar, and then drop it off the pass and basically tow it across the snow in the wintertime.
As temperatures rise, Hagel is searching for ways to protect some of the most isolated.
So, I think that's gonna close out tonight's stream. I'd like to improve. Please leave a comment below. Let me know what I can do to make this more fun and engaging. I've got a lot of research to do with how to share content with you guys while working. So I know I need to add some kind of commentary or something to make it transformative. It's hard to do while I am working. But if you want to drop a comment below,